A Room of One's Own, Part 4 by Virginia Woolf. This one, thanks to the hospitality of the host, had lasted far into the afternoon. The beautiful October day was fading and the leaves were falling from the trees in the avenue as I walked through it. Gate after gate seemed to close with gentle finality behind me. Innumerable beadles were fitting innumerable keys into well-oiled locks. The treasure house was being made secure for another night. After the avenue one comes out upon a road, I forget its name, which leads you, if you take the right turning, along to Fernham. But there was plenty of time. Dinner was not till 7:30. One could almost do without dinner after such a luncheon. It is strange how a scrap of poetry works in the mind and makes the legs move in time to it along the road. Those words, "There has fallen a splendid tear from the passion flower at the gate. She is coming, my dove, my dear," sang in my blood as I stepped quickly along towards Headingley. And then, switching off into the other measure, I sang Where the Waters Are Churned Up by Their Weir. My heart is like a singing bird whose nest is in a watered shoot. My heart is like an apple tree. What poets, I cried aloud, as one does in the dusk, what poets they were. In a sort of jealousy, I suppose for our own age, silly and absurd though these comparisons are, I went on to wonder if honestly one could name two living poets now as great as Tennyson and Christina Rossetti were then. Obviously it is impossible, I thought, looking into those foaming waters, to compare them. The very reason why that poetry excites one to such abandonment, such rapture, is that it celebrates some feeling that one used to have. At luncheon parties before the war, perhaps, so that one responds easily, familiarly, without troubling to check the feeling or to compare it with any that one has now. But the living poets express a feeling that is actually being made and worn out of us at the moment. One does not recognise it in the first place. Often, for some reason, one fears it. One watches it with keenness and compares it jealously and suspiciously with the old feeling that one knew. Hence the difficulty of modern poetry, and it is because of this difficulty that one cannot remember more than 2 consecutive lines of any good modern poet. For this reason, that my memory failed me, the argument flagged for want of material. For why, I continued, moving on towards Headingley, have we stopped humming under our breath at luncheon parties? Why has Alfred ceased to sing? She is coming, my dove, my dear. Why has Christina ceased to respond? My heart is gladder than all these, because my love is come to me. Shall we lay the blame on the war? When the guns fired in August 14, did the faces of men and women show so plain in each other's eyes that romance was killed? Certainly it was a shock to women in particular with their illusions about education and so on, to see the faces of our rulers in the light of the shell fire. So ugly they looked, German, English, French, so stupid. But lay the blame where one will, on whom one will, the illusion which inspired Tennyson and Christina Rossetti to sing so passionately about the coming of their loves is far rarer now than then. One has only to read, to look, to listen, to remember. But why say blame? Why, if it is an illusion, not praise the catastrophe, whatever it was, that destroyed illusion and put truth in its place? For truth, those dots mark the spot where, in search of truth, I missed the turning up to Fernham. Yes, indeed, which was truth and which was illusion? I asked myself, what was the truth about these houses, for example, dim and festive now with their red windows in the dusk, but raw and red and squalid with their sweets and their bootlaces at 9 o'clock in the morning? And the willows and the river and the gardens that run down to the river, vague now with the mist stealing over them, but gold and red in the sunlight. Which was the truth? Which was the illusion about them? I spare you the twists and turns of my cogitations, for no conclusion was found on the road to Headingley. And I ask you suppose that I soon found out my mistake about the turning, and retraced my steps to Fernham. As I have said already, that it was an October day, I dare not forfeit your respect and imperil the fair name of fiction by changing the season and describing lilacs hanging over garden walls, crocuses, tulips, and other flowers of spring. Fiction must stick to facts, and the truer the facts, the better the fiction, so we are told. Therefore it was still autumn, and the leaves were still yellow and falling, if anything, a little faster than before, because it was now evening, 7:23 to be precise, and a breeze from the southwest to be exact had risen, but for all that there was something odd at work. My heart is like a singing bird whose nest is in a watered shoot. My heart is like an apple tree whose boughs are bent with thick-set fruit. Perhaps the words of Christina Rossetti were partly responsible for the folly of the fancy. It was nothing, of course, but a fancy, that the lilac was shaking its flowers over the garden walls, and the brimstone butterflies were scudding hither and thither, and the dust of the pollen was in the air. A wind blew from what quarter I know not, but it lifted the half-grown leaves so that there was a flash of silver grey in the air. It was the time between the lights when colours undergo their intensification and purples and golds burn in window panes like the beat of an excitable heart, when for some reason the beauty of the world revealed and yet soon to perish. Here I pushed into the garden, for unwisely the door was left open and no beadle seemed about. The beauty of the world, which is so soon to perish, has two edges, one of laughter, one of anguish, cutting the heart asunder. The gardens of Fernham lay before me in the spring twilight, wild and open, and in the long grass sprinkled and carelessly flung, where daffodils and bluebells, not orderly perhaps at the best of times, and now wind-blown and waving as they tugged at their roots. The windows of the building curved like ship's windows among generous waves of red brick, changed from lemon to silver under the flight of the quick spring clouds. Somebody was in a hammock. Somebody, but in this light they were phantoms, only half guessed, half seen, raced across the grass. Would no one stop her? And then on the terrace, as if popping out to breathe the air, to glance at the garden, came a bent figure, formidable yet humble, with her great forehead and her shabby dress. Could it be the famous scholar? Could it be J.H. herself? All was dim, yet intense too, as if the scarf which the dusk had flung over the garden were torn asunder, or by star or sword, the gash of some terrible reality leaping, as its way is, out of the heart of the spring for youth. End of part 4.